We will now have a special address by a doyen of the environmental space, Dr. Ashok Khosla, Chairman, Development Alternatives and Trustee, Club of Rome, India. Dr. Khosla set up and directed the Indian government's first Office of Environment in Fujairah, the UN's first environmental information system, Development Alternatives, as well as the world's first social enterprise for sustainable development initiatives. He has been co-chair of the UN's International Resource Panel, president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and president of the Club of Rome. He was a member of the Government of India's National Security Advisory Board and Scientific Advisory Council to the Cabinet. For his contributions, he was awarded the OBE by the British government, the UN Sasakawa Environment Prize, and the Zayed International Environment Prize, among others. He has been co-chair of the UN's International Resource Panel and president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. He was a member of the Government of India's National Security Advisory Board and Scientific Advisory Council to the Cabinet. Dr. Khosla? Sir?
Thank you, Madam. I guess we can start with a brief comment that in the presence of so many distinguished diplomats, I'm going to be intruding into their territory because this session is about the diplomacy needed for establishing good North-South relations in the field of sustainability. And in is walking one such distinguished diplomat, and I hope he will forgive me in intruding into his territory as well. So I'd like to talk to you about the evolution over the last 50 years of the kind of diplomacy that we've been carving out a new sustainable future for nations and the world with. And the purpose of my talk really is to show that while official diplomacy has a very important role to play, it needs to be supplemented with other kinds of diplomacy in other sectors such as business, civil society, and the kinds of ways in which we communicate between and among nations. You know, over the last century, our world has made a great deal of progress. There's no question that we live better and longer lives. We have comforts that no one could imagine, even pharaohs in the old days. We have basically more things, more knowledge, more ability to take care of ourselves and move around. And of course, we have many more things in our world. And this is essentially a major step forward in civilization. The kinds of possessions we have, the kinds of access to things we have, this is a picture of a family in 2005, almost 20 years ago, of the food that these family of four had for 1 week in Europe. The total cost of that food for that week was 342 euros of that time, and you can see they were pretty well fed. And if you look at the right-hand pizza, it shows that about 30% of that food was actually wasted, probably luckily so, otherwise they would all be in hospital if they had consumed all of it. But the basic thing is that there is in this world rampant consumption of all kinds of things and food and producing large kinds of waste. This is a good life that all of us have enjoyed, and we have also, at the end of it, been able to develop a civilization that is pretty unequal. In 1991, the UNDP published its first Human Development Report, and it showed this picture on its cover. It's called the champagne glass, whoops, what happened? It's called the champagne glass, could you get me back? Yes. Champagne glass theory of economic development. And basically the top 20% got 80% of the wealth and income of the world, and the bottom 80% got less than 5 or 6%. We're having a little trouble. I'm not pressing anything yet. Could I go back to that champagne glass? Is there anyone to help me? Thank you. So, in the year 2007, literally 17 years later, after that Human Development Report, it was no longer 20% and 80%, it was 1%. We were talking about not a champagne glass, but a bar stool of a kind of lopsided ownership of assets and wealth throughout the world. In another 5 years, you can see the Oxfam report, which was delivered to the World Economic Forum in 2022, where literally 8 billionaires in the world owned as much as half the population, the bottom half of the population of the world. So we have a very, very extreme inequality of wealth and income, and that is a part of the whole issue of sustainability too. So the question is, what happens to those who got left behind? Where are they going to essentially make a decent life and living for themselves? And we have to look at the development trajectory and ask, is it sustainable? From 1991 to 2007 to 2020, we went from 20% to 1% to 0.1% of the world essentially owning virtually everything. What kind of ancestors do we want to be to our descendants? What kinds of industries are we going to have so that they can also have what they want? So sustainability is not just about the environment, it is also about equity and equality, it's about efficiency, it's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about well-being. And sustainability is something that needs a look at the other half that got left behind. These are pictures of people who live in an area of central India where I work, which show what kinds of deprivations that they have. There's more than 1,000 million people in the world who don't have adequate drinking water. There's large numbers of people who live with extreme scarcity of resources. There's basically a massive die-off of women in their kitchens from the smoke coming from the cook stoves. But roughly 500,000 people in India, according to WHO, die each year from so-called indoor pollution. Now, you remember the family I showed you from Europe, which consumed a large amount of food, that's this one, and wasted about 30% of that. In parts of the third world, in the parts of the global south, you have people like that with families of 5, 6, 7, and having that much food for a whole week. So you can see the disparities. They're not going to waste very much out of that, what they have. And this little girl with her 2 brothers, one of them in her lap, is asking, what can we do for our country? They have a right to have a decent life, but they also are a loss to the nation's well-being. So you've got this world GDP all very skewed, and it leads to huge overconsumption, chaotic urbanization, lock-in for decades with very bad resource use methods. It depends on mining the earth and poisoning the atmosphere, and poisoning the land and chemicals into the farmlands and the soils. And of course, leads also to things like climate change, which have their own huge impacts. Forest fires, droughts, desertification, extreme events, and species extinction. This is biodiversity loss at a scale that has never been seen before. And you can see, for example, the tiger, which is our national animal in India, basically gradually, not so gradually, disappearing in front of our eyes. 3 years ago, This one bluefin tuna fish was sold in Tokyo for 330 million yen, which is about $100 million. So you can imagine what is going to happen to any future bluefin tuna that is seen by any boat, any fishing boat. They're not going to leave it alone because it's just too valuable to allow to escape. And it's pretty close to being extinct now because of the massive onslaught for basically making sushi. This is a problem which afflicts all kinds of resources. The sand, ordinary sand for building and construction, has now become so scarce that there is a law in several states of India, several provinces, where it is forbidden to use sand for construction. And there is a whole mafia which is essentially making sand an underhand business. So we have a disparate, very, very unequal world, which leads to all kinds of overconsumption and underconsumption and diseases, and essentially shows a great deal of problems. And the international community needs to work together to solve these problems, because they don't respect national boundaries. They're all over the place. So here you have the problem of poverty and underconsumption. We need now to find ways in which to converge the over-consuming world with the under-consuming world, the subsistence society, and that needs a different kind of diplomacy that we have been used to in past centuries. The threats to our global body politic are many. We are living in a time of great crisis. Some people call it polycrises. This is pollution and production and overpopulation and poverty and biodiversity loss and climate change and societal breakdown, financial breakdown right now. You know, reading the newspapers, we don't really have very many areas of our lives which are not in basic crisis. And we need to understand that planetary problems need planetary solutions. And in order for that to happen, planetary solutions need international cooperation. International cooperation needs trained diplomats, of course, to negotiate better deals for everyone. And these diplomats need experts for technical and other advice. So today's governments, whether they're in the global south or in the global north, are all trained more or less in the same way at the same universities, thinking about the same things, that the only future is growth, massive economic growth, which is essentially more FDIs, more foreign direct investment, higher stock market indexes, growth rates to be taken up, rising foreign portfolios, and it's an economy based on hit and run on resources. Extract resources, make things, and throw them away. And so essentially our whole approach at international negotiations is between people from the north and people from the south who are all essentially trying to ask for the same things which are not sustainable. So the economic liberalization policies of our countries everywhere, north, south, encouraged by the World Bank and IMF and everybody else, are higher efficiencies, less regulation, global markets, and the austerity programs for the poor, and incentives for business to do more and more of what it does. So frankly, it's not going to be a sustainable future if we depend on the past ways of negotiation. International negotiations need active civil society participation, not only for deeper insights on the interests of people, on the issues, on the impacts, but also on how to understand what is a good future for everyone. In the old days, 300 years ago, 400 years ago nearly, diplomacy was about a zero-sum game. You had to win, and you had to win at the expense of the enemy, and you had basically treaties and conventions like the Westphalia Convention, which essentially involved the normal standard diplomacy methods. Diplomacy in today's world of global threats, which need value and science-based responses, which are essentially diplomacy with an understanding of the need for cooperation to get a better world, where it's a win-win situation for everyone, is very different. It's highly complex, and can you do the next one, please? And it's basically to address the classical model of sustainability, which has three strands, three legs, if you like, to stand on: the social, the economic, and the environmental. To bring them together, we need to make certain compromises, of course, and trade-offs, but for everyone to get benefits, you need to do what was done in 2015 to bring together the heads of state, heads of government from 195 countries in New York to launch the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Agenda 2030, which was supposed to be completed by 2030. The history of negotiations in the sustainability era goes all the way back to the 1970s. The first major conference that took place was essentially in Stockholm, and at Stockholm there were two heads of government present in the entire conference: the host, Olof Palme, and the superstar, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India. With them came major delegations, of course, and that was the start of diplomacy in the era of sustainability. Fortunately, it had a Secretary General, Dr. Maurice Strong, who believed very much in involving wider participation, and he made room for civil society to be quite active there. And essentially, the Stockholm Conference provided a model for the new kind of diplomacy needed for sustainable development. 2 weeks ago, we had a treaty adopted in New York called the High Seas Treaty, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, which essentially was a treaty that took 20 years of deep diplomacy and with massive inputs from experts and business and civil society to ensure that it met everybody's requirements. The future lies in understanding the basis of how we're going to bring about this cooperation, and it depends on understanding that the North has to contract and the South, the global South, has to have the room, space to expand and to converge, and the two must come together at some point to understand that you can't get efficiency without equity, you can't have resources conserved. Our massive problem with the plastics, for example, need to be dealt with, and today's need for promotion of new agreements must include these issues: hydropower standards for sustainability, plastics wastes, resource convention, and I think there's a lot more yet coming down the turnpike for diplomacy in the area of sustainability. The growing complexity of issues, including the technology possibilities, the resource constraints, the human aspirations, means that there is need for better mutual understanding among policymakers and scientists. That also means between diplomats and technical experts and civil society. So we want to work together and for a sustainable future, globally, nationally, and locally, and we hope that we can bring about our new form of diplomacy into a sphere where all of us can contribute to a better world. Thank you.
Thank you for that very special address, sir. Can we have a presentation to Dr. Khosla, please? Thank you. Our next session is titled, Amidst Conflicts from the Ukraine to the South China Sea, Can Diplomacy Isolate and Promote Environmental Sustainability? I now have the pleasure of introducing the chairperson of the session, Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, who currently heads ICDHWAJ Advisors, a boutique consulting firm on trade, industrial, and regulatory policies. He had previously worked at the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, World Trade Organization for 20 years, including 8 years as Deputy Director General of the WTO. He has been Secretary of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India in its initial 8 years and Executive Director of Brookings India. He has been Senior Fellow at think tanks in Switzerland and Canada, taught at universities in the US and China, been Chair and Secretary of GATT and WTO dispute settlement panels, and chaired high-level expert groups in India and overseas on policy concerns relating to international trade, industrial, competition, and regulatory policies. Dr. Singh has an MPhil and DPhil in economics from Oxford University, after an MA and BA honours in economics from Delhi University. He has also been Senior Fellow, Council on Emerging Market Enterprises, the Fletcher School, Tufts University, USA, Senior Research Affiliate, Berkeley Apex Study Center. Welcome, Dr. Singh. The first speaker at this session is a distinguished diplomat, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, who retired from the Indian Foreign Service after serving as ambassador to Nepal. He has also served as ambassador of India to the European Union, Belgium, and Nepal. He was deputy permanent representative to the UN when India was on the Security Council. His main areas of experience relate to multilateralism, Europe, and Nepal. His focus has been also on the environment, climate change, and sustainable development. He was a lead negotiator for India at the UN on issues relating to the post-2015 development agenda, sustainable development goals, and at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro. He was a key member of India's delegation at various climate change negotiations, including the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC in Copenhagen in December 2009, and before that at Montreal, Bali, Bonn, and Poznan. Furthermore, he was involved with India's participation in the G8 to G5 summits from 2005 and was the point person for the Major Economies Forum. Welcome, Ambassador Puri. The next speaker is Dr. Laura Yarakasheva, professor at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University's Oriental Faculty and Faculty of History. She has research works published in Kazakhstan, Russian, and English languages, including UNESCO policy research publications. She is Deputy Chairperson, the Dissertation Council, Faculty of History, Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. She has participated in strategic planning under the UNDP Sustainable Development Partnership with the Republic of Kazakhstan. She is a member of UNESCO's Executive Committee for Interreligious Dialogue and Intercultural Understanding and member of its Advisory Committee for developing e-learning resources for promoting intercultural dialogue and mutual understanding. Welcome, Dr. Yarakasheva. The final speaker is Lieutenant General Arun Kumar Sahani, UISM, SM, VSM retired, former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Southwestern Command. Lieutenant General Sahani is a decorated soldier scholar with 40 years of commissioned service in the Indian Army. He retired as General Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Southwestern Command. He is a distinguished fellow with 2 premier think tanks in New Delhi and a corporate advisor in defense initiatives. He has vast experience of command and staff in the Army, in operational environments from Sri Lanka to the Northeast, to Jammu and Kashmir. He has served as a military diplomat in Russia, played a role in the military in looking at force structuring and capability development, and in information technology. A respected analyst on defense and on India's security challenges, he now also mentors startups in the domain of cyber, robotics, and AI. A trustee of an environmental policy group that he actively steers, he is also on the managing board of a reputed public school and university. Welcome, Lieutenant General Sahani. I will now hand over the session to the chairperson to deliver his own address and to conduct the proceedings.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Absolutely a pleasure. I think my first briefing.
Thank you, ma'am. And good afternoon to all. A special welcome to the distinguished speakers for this session. I won't really be addressing Pradipto, hi. But I do want to just identify the key issues which the main speakers here will comment on today. I think the title very aptly captures it. I'll read the title. Amidst conflicts from the Ukraine to the South China Sea, can diplomacy isolate and promote environmental sustainability? So, widespread conflicts, but the solution, as Dr. Khosla said in his remarks, the keynote remarks, solutions require nations to work together. Otherwise, the difficult issues which we have to deal with in terms of sustainability, including environmental sustainability, and it was pointed out that sustainability has many facets. We will focus on environmental sustainability, but environmental itself is a large concept, so it gives you some leeway. So without identifying the key areas in a situation where lots of conflicts are resulting in people taking contrary positions, how do we actually find solutions to our common problems? That is a role for a diplomatic initiative, and that's something which we would like to see if and how it might be possible to isolate and promote environmental sustainability in an era where national interests and conflicting positions dominate. So the first speaker is Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri. Ambassador, I request you to take the floor, please.
Mind if I speak from here? Young lady, sorry that I'm taking up your pulpit. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Dr. Moses, Nisha, thank you very, very much for inviting me. I'm deeply honored. And I want to say I'm doubly honored because I have my guru, Dr. Pradipto Ghosh here. Mrs. Ghosh, welcome to you all. And Harsh, who's a senior colleague and a mentor in various ways. Dr. Khosla here. He was just thanking me for having, as they say, pushed him in. But you know, he became chairman of the IUCN worldwide. What an honor for India, sir. And that's what only you, with your leadership, could do. So look, I want to speak to you only for a few minutes. I want you to ask me questions. And look, I am a practitioner. I've been through the trenches. I've done this most of my life. And I want to let you know that the concepts of the world coming together, we talk a lot about people, we talk a lot about businesses, societies, very important. But the way they work in the world is they work through their domestic political processes. When it becomes interesting for the US polity to react to US domestic pressures, they will act. So will the Europeans, so do we, and so does everyone. The world is composed of nation states. Whether they act right or wrong doesn't matter. But those of you who are studying international relations should be very clear. Nation states act for their interests. Global interests, good idea. That's what they work on. And for that, please be crystal clear on what can be done and what can't be done. Whatever you wish to do, put pressure on your domestic government. If you carry the weight, that government will bat for you. And that's the way these things happen. That doesn't mean that civil society, businesses don't have ideas, don't have interest, and they don't coalesce across the world. A simple question is that of technology. When technology gets developed somewhere, today in the world of globalization, it flows, it reaches, and everybody becomes interested in it. And governments actually become impediments. And so therefore, those kind of cooperations are bound to happen and they will continue to happen. Now let me try and bring you to the session's topic. Polycrisis. Isn't that what it is? Ukraine, coming out of the pandemic, global recession. I'm not mentioning the ones in the Indo-Pacific. There's endless numbers of them. The WTO, where our chairman served for a long time, nobody knows what it's doing or what it's up to. The United Nations, people say, has it failed us, but has it ever not failed us? Or has it really failed us? We don't know the answers. The answers are the way you perceive things. That things are not changing to reflect contemporary realities as you see it is different from things actually changing or not changing. We sit around and say, the UN has not changed, and I completely agree with that. I spent the better part of my life batting for change for contemporary reality because I believe that India is part of the changed reality in the world. But some other people may not want it. Many others may not want it, not because they don't recognize that the world has changed, but because they want to know what is it in it for them. They have got used to the idea of the world as it is. They don't want any other new guys or kids on the block unless you are able to pay for it or make it useful for them. Dr. Khosla led you through something very interesting. From a champagne glass to a bar stool, I don't know where we have gone. But have you seen India's split of the GDP? I'm not even sure if it's the bar stools, sir. There's perhaps nothing there. It's so thin at the very top. And that's the rest of us put together. And that includes middle-class guys like us. But these are realities of the world. I want to leave with you basically one thought. There are polycrises in the world, and I'm not sure we have easy solutions that we can debate in these rooms and reach a conclusion, or we can even debate in the United Nations, in the UN Security Council, the G20, or anywhere else, and find ways forward. But are there elements of these polycrises that we can isolate and progress, your words, Mr. Chairman, which we can isolate and progress, and which are challenges which have a global dimension, and perhaps may not be those of the greatest relevance to nation states or most profile elements as far as nation states are concerned at a particular time. And let me be more honest and clear with you. Ukraine. Everybody thinks everyone has the solution. I don't know. As a diplomatist, someone who's been in these trenches for a long, knows these things, has faced the heat as a member of the UN Security Council, I'm not so sure. I don't think it's very easy, the ideas of mediation, etc. Why shouldn't the UN Secretary General have been toing and froing between Moscow and capitals in the world if it was an easy matter? These are different matters. But are there areas where we can come together? I believe so, and I'll mention one to you. I'll mention one not only because it's a matter of interest to me, but because it demonstrates how you can isolate and progress. And that instant area is this more specific area of climate change rather than the much broader issue of sustainable development. I want to ask you, how many of you have followed climate change negotiations? Any of you? Anything? Do you know anything more than UNFCCC? Any of your classes, do they teach anything? Nothing. What do you study? International relations? Environment. And what do they teach you in environment? Use solar panels, green hydrogen will find the solution to everything. Is that it? Do anybody teaches you policy? No, it isn't. Don't worry, Indian universities are not the only ones. Policy ideas are extremely difficult, and global policy issues are even more, let me say they interest everyone, but why get your hands dirty in them? That's the nature of the game. And I was a little fortunate because I had gurus like Dr. Ghosh who sort of made me see the way anyway it was my profession. So we must remember a few things. Global negotiations fundamentally are about two or three things. One is burden sharing. They're not about doing the right thing. They're about burden sharing. You can do what you want. You can fully become a renewables country on your own. That's your choice. You're doing it at your own price, at your own cost, at whatever else you do. International negotiations are about the globe coming together. If not collaboration, at least burden sharing. The second thing is about policy space. And policy space is something that we in a developing country, and in most developing countries, there is relatively little understanding. Now, those of you who study international relations, have any of you figured out what's the difference between a rules-based international order and international law? Anyone ever thought of that? Have you heard of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea? Do you know which country speaks up most for right of navigation, freedom of navigation, this, that, and the other? Come on, name a country. Yes, sir. Are they a member of the UNCLOS? Yes, sir. Do you know the answer now of rules-based international order and international law? International law, quintessentially, obviously means the power, the agreed document. Rules-based is, my rules. I'm the boss. This is the necessity and understanding of what happens. And what is policy space? So why are they not a member of the UNCLOS? Have you ever thought of it? It's not that they don't want freedom of the seas. It's not that they want unbridled exploitation, not at all. But the main reason why they are hesitant and when they come close by and don't do it is what is called policy space. I don't want my international commitments to bind me down in terms of what I can do domestically. Now that's good or bad, I don't know. There's a country like Japan where there is an old-fashioned idea that let yourself be bound by international conventions, it will get you to do things. Is this the right approach for India? I don't know. This is a bit of a lesson in what I'm saying to you in terms of international negotiations, reality, practicality of negotiations, and what we do. But why have I said all this? Fundamentally, because I believe that in the area of sustainability and more so in the area of climate change, it would appear, no matter Ukraine, no matter various other things, no matter COVID, but among the biggest players in the world, whether you call them major emitters or you call them major economies, whatever, there is a willingness to cooperate on climate change. And the best example of this was what happened in Glasgow. All that we all remember of Glasgow is in the last day, the British were pointing fingers at us for not agreeing to phase out of coal instead of phase down of coal. But where was the phrase phase down coming from? It wasn't the idea of the Indian delegation. It was a document which was signed by the United States and China just 2 days before the end of the Glasgow summit. And why I'm saying this to you is basically to illustrate to you that there is a willingness in the world. There is a willingness to come together on this major global challenge. Why is there a willingness? I'll take a minute and come to that. At Sharm el-Sheikh, the world agreed on the idea of loss and damage and a compensatory fund for whoever has fallen for it and all. Dr. Moses, you wrote the concept paper for this session, and you spoke of the V20. If I'm not mistaken, there are some 50-odd countries which are member of the V20 now. And who are those 50-odd countries? They leave out the country which resulted in the loss and damage coming through, which was Pakistan. These are the ways the things happened at the United Nations. When the LDC groupings were set up, the country which fitted the bill most to become an LDC was India. Had we joined, where would the rest of the countries been? The LDC group folded hands, cut a cake, and was most happy when Bangladesh was removed from the group of LDCs. Why? Because Bangladesh by itself and all the LDCs together were coming up to this much. So in the world, there is now a clear understanding between large, you can use this word, emerging developing countries and a whole host of smaller developing countries, which is yet another schism which should be accepted and understood. We will and continue to be part of the global south and work hard on it. But we need to understand that there are divergences in the way member states tend to act in this matter. So I want to stop by leaving you provoked to ask me this, whether after the other speakers have spoken or not, that depends on our chairman. But I want you to ask me why. But I believe that in the world, there is a willingness among the larger economies of the world, developing ones included, but certainly the most important 2 or 3 economies in the world, that we need to take global action on climate change. What will that action be is a bit of a different matter. One of the areas that is likely to get pushed is that of what people tend to call mitigation, which basically means cutting down on greenhouse gases. A subset of that is attacking fossil fuels, coal in particular. Is this very good and wonderful for us? We can debate that. It's a full subject by itself. But the reality is that that's the direction in which the world is going. The second area is that of money. Everybody asks, where is that 100 billion which was promised in 2009 in Copenhagen? Please read that text very carefully. 100 billion was promised starting 2020 from 2009. Frankly, it didn't matter to anyone who was sitting in the room. 30 billion was promised starting 1 year from that particular day.
Ambassador Puri,
Just
if you could, yeah.
There is a very wonderful word called about, which was added before that 30 billion. Life continues to remain about. But fundamentally, we need to think about what would be good for us. Because in terms of the world, Mr. Chairman, I assure you, it appears to me quite crystal clear that among the haves, from the have-nots as well as those who are always the haves, there is willingness and interest to do something on climate change. We need to stitch situations in such a way that the outcomes are such that we can either profit or live with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for such a rich, thoughtful menu for discussions. No, it's extremely, I was just busy taking notes while you were speaking. Perhaps the question-answer session or later discussions can expand on that. I now request Dr. Laura Yereksheva for her words, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, dear participants. Thank you very much, Mr. Moses Nisha, for organizing this wonderful event. In a series of events you made earlier. May I ask your attention towards my presentation? I will be brief as possible, which speaks about, the theme of which speaks about the environment, particularly environmental sustainability, peace building and preservation of natural and cultural sites. From the beginning, it perhaps may be some disappointment at why environment and sustainability are linked to culture, cultural sites, but this, to my mind, reflects the changing nature of the world we're living in. When we speak about culture, I'm dealing more with the culture rather than environment and industry. However, I found that it is impossible to think about culture without those mentions, without those fields which influences us from any perspective. So the focus of my presentation on this is on the preservation of natural cultural sites as a process that reflects not only environmental and developmental environmental and cultural development, but rather could be viewed as a global sustainability and even the peace building process. So I will use this holistic approach towards peace building to show how it embraces seemingly unrelated, however very much intertwisted fields of sustainability, as I told, peace building and culture. So there are the following key points in this presentation, that the change in perception and the evolution of the concept of peace and peace building in addressing the new challenges worldwide and based on the human rights perspective. And the second is that this is acknowledgement of the key role of knowledge, leading learning and education in a knowledge-driven economies. So I'm using this holistic approach. I mean, it is necessary to use that applies cross-sectoral interdisciplinary analysis. So what is a peace building?
Like, we used to see that in the discourse that peace and peace-related activities such as peace construction, peacekeeping, peace maintenance, peace building, mediation, conciliation, reconciliation, culture of prevention, culture of peace, and so on. So these are constructions that are based on the universal yet very concrete concepts and terms that underline the guiding principles of United Nations. The term peace building, as you know, emerged in international discourse quite recently in 1992 through the UN Agenda for Peace. However, as a universal concept, peace has been perceived variously by intellectuals and practitioners as well. So what is the expanded, I may highlight this, expanded UN Agenda for Peace? For example, UNESCO made research as far as in 2018 in which they underlined that today peace is not only about the war and large-scale violence, but it is also about social justice, poverty alleviation, women's empowerment, and harnessing the potential of young people and children's welfare. So it means that it also brings to the fore the environmental, health, cultural concerns, including heritage, music, theater, and sports. So this is the emergent concept of sustaining peace, which linked quite organically with the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. All this suggests a holistic perspective towards achieving a culture of prevention. So it means that the same issues of peace can no longer be related separately from the development. Equally same, we may speak about the culture. So hence, achieving positive outcomes from this holistic approach needs to be a transformative one. So here in this table, I just compiled this, which I would like to stress that these seemingly unrelated links among environmental sustainability, peace building, and preservation of cultural sites could be better understood if we apply this systems approach. We speak about these all big planes, like starting from the below, organic, cognitive, and relational and institutional plane. And these planes, which, within which I highlighted the themes or so-called fields that speaks about those activities. And if you see that when we speak about the organic plane, we speak about the health of the mental, health physical, health of the earth. On the higher level cognitive, we speak about learning and education, and in the context of today's development, it is lifelong learning. While we're speaking about the relational planes, what is about the social milieu and the life we're living in, it means that we, first of all, need to highlight the social participation and engagement. Whereas on the institutional highest level, so to say, there are cultures and institutions, and all this dialogue, history, identity, and memory. So all these planes and particular themes related very much with the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly SDGs 5 pillars, so to say areas of critical importance, which has been identified in 2015 by UN as planet, people, partnership, prosperity, and peace. I rearranged two of them like partnership, prosperity. I took them together. So this approach gives us the opportunity to link the idea of peace building and culture in a very wide range of development and sustainability issues, including those similarly and related to peacemaking process. So let us speak then. Let us speak about the further brief part of my presentation. If we speak about structure and agency, then we speak about agencies, actors, and institutions. So, and how this concept has practical implementation. First of all, I would like to highlight the UNESCO's activity because I was privileged to contribute to a number of UNESCO activities. So for this reason, it is more area which is more close to me. So in 1972, UNESCO adopted one of the very important document, Convention concerning the protection of the world cultural and natural heritage, adopted by its conference in Paris, in which particularly the article number 11 and particularly 11.4 is very important because in this article it is stated the list of World Heritage in danger. So this is a list of the property appearing in the World Heritage list for conservation. And this list may include only such property forming part of the cultural or natural heritage as is threatened by serious and specific dangers. And this list specifies this type of dangers, such as threat of disappearance caused by accelerated deterioration, large-scale public or private projects, or rapid urban or tourist development projects, destruction caused by changes in the use of ownership of the land, major alterations due to the unknown issues, abandonment for any reason whatsoever, the outbreak or the threat of an armed conflict, calamities and cataclysms, serious fires, earthquakes, landslide, volcanic eruptions, changes in water level, floods, and tidal waves. So this is broadly could be defined as the framework within which the culture and sustainability issues now giving us its particular form. So this list of endangered list heritage of danger here is visible on the map, and you may find all these red dots which are there presented are situated mainly in some particular regions of the world, so-called developing world, or so-called global south, for the small exception. For example, as for the Latin, in this map, UNESCO made both cultural and natural sites, which I scrapped in the list. So Latin America and the Caribbean have, you may see from this table, have 6 or 11%, while Europe and North America 9%, Asian Pacific 11%, Arab states one of the most, which they have 42%, and Africa has 27%. What does this mean? This means, broadly speaking, that the location, spread, and scale of World Heritage sites in danger, as evident from this table, from this map and table, is a testimony of the fact that the reason for this inclusion in the danger sites list are either low development or precisely precisely underdevelopment, lack of resources, not only financial but some other institutional skills and so, or the geopolitical implications as a result of the war and conflicts. So, for example, if we look further and see as per the country range, then we may find that in Afghanistan there are 2 sites under the danger as described by UNESCO. In Iraq, 3, Libya, 5, Syrian Arab Republic, 6, Yemen, 4. So it means that for the purpose of, I will not name you the name of these sites in danger, but I will just would like to make it point your attention to this fact that all this list of the sites of cultural and natural heritage in danger indicates that there is a sort of trend, and this trend is like here. Yes, I made this a list of World Heritage in danger. As per yes, 2 minutes I have this. So it we may also correlate this to the activity of the of the G20 group. V20 group, which is the vulnerable 20 group of ministries of finance of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, established in 2015, and all speaking about the same goals equally the same way as UNESCO speaks about the cultural natural sites, and this is about the development. So then we, as far as the other actors, I don't know. This is, I think, some other. Can you back? You can book back. I'll just complete my backwards. Backward. There is again. Yes, let's stop here. So I'll just mention you the activity of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, with a partner of UNESCO, which is a member union composed of both government, civil societies, operating in more than 58 countries, and so this organization makes research relating to this Heritage Committee. And it also speaks about the different projects. For example, in my region, when I came from Kazakhstan, from Central Asia, there are different project cases. I would like just to put attention to 3 of them briefly to mention. The project Enhancing Cooperation for Conservation Impact in the Western Tian Shan Mountains, which is recently has been to 2022-2024, it's continuing project. This is very important because it's a transnational project focusing on Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, founded by the Switzerland organization. Then the project Save Our Species Central Asia, which has been completed last year. For 2 years it was
Dr.
operational.
Yerekshov.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the one project fostering water, energy, and food security in Central Asia. So all these projects are part of those activities of both, not only the governmental, but grassroots local societies. So this is an important takeaway which I would like to put in my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for pinpointing certain key areas of action or focus. And when we combine them with what Ambassador Puri had talked about, the concepts of burden sharing, policy space, schisms, and the willingness to come to a conclusion together, let's see whether there is some solution there. So, General Sani, I request you to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's rather late. We've had a heavy dose of sustainability, climate change problems that are happening. But I think the theme of the subject, with whatever I've heard today, has highlighted 2 issues. There undoubtedly is a divide between the global south and the global north. And I think somewhere down the line, we'll have to find how can we rationalize and address these anomalies so that hopefully, as he said, we leave a better world for our grandkids, if we can. But more importantly, firstly, let me thank Mr. Moses, Nisha, GDF for having allowed us to become part of your seminar today, and also to give me a chance to be here. Delighted to be with a very, very august panel of speakers. There are great luminaries sitting in the audience, and delighted to see the young youth of India who are actually going to be the ones who are going to feel the impact and will have to actually be the engines of change, if you want to see it. Here there can be a lot of big talk, but you guys will have to really push it and make sure things happen. Firstly, the subject itself, let me say I was a little, I readily accepted speaking in this thing because when he talked about war, I said, well, that's something which I'm familiar with. Yeah, so that's not a problem. I can talk about it. Sustainable development by default, because Ashok Khosla took me under the wings and I run this Club of Rome. So I've started understanding a bit of the jargon, what it deals with. But more importantly, the gray area of diplomacy, which I saw in 3 years in Moscow, left me absolutely, I would say, on the back foot, that this is one area which I don't think I can, as a soldier, really handle too well. I understand it, its requirement is there, but how to go about it diplomatically, because I love to work in black and whites. So let me start with that as the backdrop. Let me just look at this war in Ukraine. I think Ukraine was undoubtedly in the European landmass, what it inherited as far as its energy methodologies were concerned, its mining, its practices that were there, but actually the most polluting based on the developed world that existed in Europe at that stage. They were on the path of trying to redress this in 2014, and they had taken measures. And then, lo and behold, we ended up with this war. You all of us sitting in our drawing rooms, see what are the havoc and the devastation it is creating. Let it be the power stations at Kharkiv, or let it be the infrastructure that is being destroyed. The human misery undoubtedly is underwritten everywhere. But the issue is, all this destruction is leading to one, requirement of reconstruction, which requires, again, whether is it going to be developmental, will it reduce emissions or will it add emissions? I think the problem is that this whole devastation that is being caused is something which was better not being there. And when you talk about the East China Sea or the South China Sea and the issues of Taiwan, I think this is the right example to show you that the devastation created there, which is avoidable, needs to be avoided to happen in the area of the South China Sea. So as a soldier, I think the best answer for the diplomats is to make sure that these wars don't happen. Because if they happen, you've got challenges which are very, very different. I just looked at it and I said, how do I define this? As I said, black and white. I looked at it and I was told in a report which came out recently that the total emissions in the war in the last 1 year are 33 million tons of carbon dioxide, and 23 million tons is caused by the fires that came in because of the firing that happened. So when I look at it, that total figure is the annual figure that comes out of any of the most polluted cities of the country, of the world, not only India. India has the top 6 in the 10, but what I'm saying is, it's the pollution is that kind of a pollution that has happened. What it's going to do to your climate change and to the global warming is a question that really requires no answer. It stares you in the face. It's something which could have been avoided. So when this happens, how do we see, where do all these NDCs that have been taken in post the 2015 Paris Accord, where do they go now? Because as you're aware, the cutbacks of 30 to 43%, which was to be decided by the developed world to be completed by 2030, was in face of the fact that there is still about 4.6 billion of the world that is still to grow up. You've got the Asia and Africa, and you've just had about 1.6 billion which had created these pollutions. If they take those 30%, this is going to be a drop in the ocean, while the developmental indexes of the developing world still has to be addressed. So how do you rationalize the two? So I think the issue that is coming out is that, are we late, or is it already too late, or can we still do something? And I think I'm drawn to this COP27 when they had this gentleman in one of the oceanic countries, the foreign minister, I think, who stood in a suit, half waist deep in water, to show that, listen, guys, climate change has already had an impact. Water level has risen. And today, when I look at what was said by the speaker from Bangladesh, I think they've been extremely forward-looking with their Delta plan, the Mujib plan, which has come in for prosperity, how they're looking at these vulnerabilities to resilience, to prosperity. I think great ideas. But the issue is, it again remains here, how do we get this technology and the finances to ensure that you can take these corrective actions in the timelines that you've set out for yourself? I think this is the problem that comes out of this whole story. But the issue is, it is late, but I think there is still something that can be done. The other thing that has come out of this Ukrainian war has been two things. That local conflicts have an impact which is not stuck to the political boundaries. Because, I mean, I'm reminded of an example which was shared by one of the speakers sometime back in one of the forums, that just before the Olympics in Beijing in 2007, 2008, the pollution levels were extremely high. They were dangerous. I mean, it could be matched to anything that was in Delhi. And within a period of time, they managed to get it down. But because of the kind of deforestation that was happening in Indonesia, it's just in, I think, 2018, 19, that you suddenly found pollution levels in Beijing going up again, with all the corrective actions. So the issue is, what is happening in local wars and conflicts has an impact across the region and across the political boundaries, and that creates greater, I would say, reasons for us to look at collaborative action to try and stem it and stop it. In all this negativity that goes around with these wars, I think this is where the role of diplomats come in. Because if you're looking at collaborative effort, it cannot happen with the size of with the gun in your hand. It can't happen with the pen in your hand. I think you need people to talk to each other, come to common grounds, and maybe that's why we've got these various conventions and treaties. But these conventions and treaties have legislated and put things down of benchmarks that we should achieve to be able to address or to be able to redress the chaos that is happening, or to arrest the chaos that is going to be happening as far as climate change is concerned. So what is the answer for all of us? I thought, I looked at just 4 issues that I need to really look at. One is the issue of climate finance will remain. I mean, that has been flagged beautifully. And till you do not have the finances, you will not have the capability. If you don't have the capability, you will not be able to address your vulnerability. How can you look at it? I heard from Cambridge, Dr. Parthasarthi had spoken in a seminar in Bangladesh recently, and where I was present myself. And I thought I loved what he said. It's very difficult to do, I know. It doesn't seem it's a possibility. But what he said is, isn't there a methodology by which you can have reverse taxation being imposed on the raw materials and resources which go out from the global south to the global north to create these luxury goods? Great idea theoretically. I don't know whether we can do it practically. It's going to be impossible. And if from what I heard in the last session, that suddenly another 20 years down the line, the food basket is going to shift northwards and not southwards, I don't know how are we going to function. So, but the issue is there is some form of taxation which needs to be imposed, whatever can be deliberated upon, to create this fundamental basket of resources which will help us to have technologies which will ensure that there is a methodology in addressing these challenges that are coming up. The second issue which I thought is technology. And I thought, I just want to share that we had, along with Balipara Foundation, started a thing called India-China Collaborative Centers. The ICCC had started off. We had an office in Kunming and one in Guwahati. Intention was that best practices there and here would be in sync with each other, so that you would pick up whether it was the research scientists there or the domain knowledge and expertise available in the Northeast, which is one of the bio-hotspots that we have in this part of South Asia, could be utilized to find out the best solutions. So I think today in technology, you can't stop the issues of IPRs, you can't stop the amount of patents, but I think what you could do is joint collaborative effort. And this is something which one of the Chinese had shared with me at one time when I went for one of these track tours, and he told me, he says, General, you keep talking about soft power, but I think India never used its soft power strategically. He says, we used it strategically. We sent people to study, get educated, came back with the expertise. They came back and set up shop in India, in China, and we have developed and are now masters of the technology. First you innovate it to get to the point, and now you become the leaders as far as technology is concerned. So I think that's an area where we can start looking at it. And for this, we really don't need everybody coming from the north. I think the brain power is highly available in the global south. You could set up research centers which could work simultaneously to develop these issues. One is on seeding. When you're looking at mitigation and adaptation strategies, you need seeds which will grow in low saline water. You will grow in drought-affected areas. I think there is capacities and domain expertise available to be able to do it. The third thing is, I think, this awareness for sustainable products. One of the issues that was raised, I think there is a need for, within India itself, I'm told by figures which I was shared by, that today you have 600 million people in India itself who are with the PPP capability of buying what is equivalent to what the European and the North American continent has. You will hit 800 million in another decade, half a decade, who will have the purchasing power of that part of the world, the developed world. If you have that, then please start imposing these sustainable products so that you ensure that you pay more and ensure that you force the buyers. And an example I can give, because when I was doing a course in Mao many years back, the Swiss cotton people came down along the Narmada and wanted to get, as they say, organic cotton to come in. For 3 years, they sustained and kept that land fallow, looked after the farmers, did all the actions that were required to ensure that the chemicals were put out of the system, and then started growing it. So there is a possibility that it can happen, that if you support it financially, and if there is a taxation requirement that comes in. We have seen in India, knowingly, all of us have given up our subsidies on LPGs and on gas cylinders. I mean, there was one call by the Prime Minister, we've done it. So I think it's possible for countries like India to be able to steer this kind of activity. And lastly, I don't know, again, like my first point, is it possible to really get people to follow and achieve their regulatory goals? If we are nearing 2030, are we looking at that 30%, or do we go by what the US President suddenly said, 2050 I'll talk about net zero emissions, which is again a story in the pipeline. So I think that kind of activity should not be there. Can there be today, if you have economic sanctions for waging wars and crossing the Rubicon, can you have some kind of punitive sanctions which can be authorized at the upper level to ensure that those who do not meet the norms which are required as far as emission norms which you have identified and stated yourself, then there would be certain amount of imposition of restrictions on their capacities to go. Maybe if you take these actions and many more, we could see some light at the end of the tunnel. I am, as a soldier, always a die-hard optimist. I'm quite convinced that things will get better. We can't be an ostrich and put our head in the air and say, Ki, everything's happening around me, but it's not happening to me. I'm sure it's going to happen to me as well. Because what happens in Bangladesh, if they have 20 million migrants, climate migrants, within the next decade, the security situation of India is going to be totally different. I'm not really looking at myself, I'm looking at the security paradigm of South Asia and the other. We are seeing what is happening with the kind of migration that's happened in Europe, and boy, there is chaos. UK wants to send them to Uganda or somewhere they want to send. So you've got problems which would come up within our own home and house, so let's look at it very seriously of how we are going to be able to address it. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, everyone. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, General. So now we have heard the three speakers, some questions to the speakers, and we will come to the end of our session. Any questions? Is it that the problem is so difficult, or is it that the solution has been found?
I think hello. I think the speakers are too daunting. You know, they overwhelm the young people in this crowd. So older people have to show the way. Anyway, I think that I praise Mr. Harshvardhan Singh for his steady take charge attitude on this, and you have summed it up. And General Sani and Laura, my friend. But the interesting part is Ambassador Manjeev Puri, who has decided to question us. So I think we should return the compliment. But I don't see how we can resolve climate change and cooperation and everything when we are going away from each other and not coming together in dialogue. If you see from the war in Ukraine or the shift now, it's turning towards Indo-Pacific. It's not about dialogue at all, it's about confrontation. So from where is Ambassador Manjeev Puri getting so much hope? Thank you.
Is there a button somewhere? Hello, yeah. Mr. Moses, thank you very much. And I am glad that I provoked at least someone. The idea was to provoke all these tables here. And I will do it before I end here. Because that's the idea behind this. Sir, you and I can have a discussion anytime. I think it's a little important to understand, and I'm now talking about the global situation. It's not hope at all. I'm not sure that I mentioned hope. I only said way forward and solutions. Or not solutions. Way forward, you may or may not like the solutions. You started off with north-south. I don't think it's like that anymore. I spent the better part of my life doing a thing called Group of 77. These were 77 developing countries which started so that the negotiations in the United Nations would be between the rich countries and the developing countries. Today there are 132 members in the Group of 77, but the reality is that large developing countries, many of the smaller ones don't look at them as if they are part of them. And let's be a little honest, among them is us, India. If you say you are the third largest economy, the second largest or fourth largest economy, the second largest is China, then what is it that a small developing country, which is 154th among a list of 196, should think in common with us? And if you notice, we also, no matter much of global south, keep coalescing in the same directions of issues which bedevil the global north. So these are realities of life. They are perhaps as a result of good or bad. But I want to make another point to you. There is a growing schism between countries, i.e. nation states and populations. For example, let's look at this. In all probability, most of these negotiations will come to the conclusion that the most vulnerable countries, the poorest countries, etc., something special should be done for them, grants, aids, whatsoever. But nobody looks at a simple fact that are you looking at the largest number of affected people? The answer is no, because that would be India, Bangladesh and Pakistan. And we have perforce to keep ourselves out because this is a game of nation states. And if you push yourself, and the reality is you have the numbers, but if you push yourself, there will be global repercussions. Or rather, for the power game that we are also in, we have to stand out and play a different game. Now, this is for all of you who are students of international relations. It doesn't mean that you should not act on community action, on people's actions, doing the right things, morality, ethics, etc. Not at all. You must. Mr. Moses, coming to your question of hope, in the specific area of climate change, and I'm talking about something pretty focused, not sustainable development, etc., which are, give it a shot, best shot kind of stuff. No. Let's look at things where there are measurable things. And if measurable you don't achieve, naming and shaming is the least of the problems. You could have carbon-based mechanisms on border taxes, CBAMs, and so on and so forth. We are talking about WTO akin kind of situations, so which the chairman here is well familiar with. What have we seen in the past? We have seen increasingly that the biggest player in the global south and the biggest player in the global north tend to coalesce. Where are we going to stand in that? We have to work that out. It's not an easy task. So let me make another simple point to you. China's aggregate GDP today is $12 trillion. We are the world's largest country, not them anymore. Ours is $2.5 trillion. Do you know, we always talk in terms of India's contribution to the GHG footprint is negligible. Our per capita GHG emissions cumulatively over time are less than half of the average of the developing world, not developed world. But do you know what the Chinese figure is? It's very close, it's above the European figure, and it is somewhere hovering, not near, but reaching the US levels. This, sir, is way the South is moving. It's not just ASEAN countries, but in many parts of the world. And so therefore, do I see the world coming together for a solution? Do I see us having to struggle along with some other large developing countries, Nigeria, Indonesia, just to name a few, and even possibly Turkey and Saudi Arabia? I don't know. But will the world come up with some kind of a solution? Quite possible. And I'll give you the example of the WTO. We were not particularly thrilled with Doha, but the world did it. And that's the nature of the challenge that we face. We face a particular challenge in India. And it isn't very easy to simply be part of the global south anymore. We are we are the global south. But these are the ways in which this is, let me say, a cost of where you are. Largest country in the world, fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, you have to understand how people look at you, not how you look at people. And that's where the perception issue drops. And that's how global negotiations get driven. Thank you.
So bridging the gap in perceptions from two sides and therefore moving towards a solution. Any other questions? If there's no question, we can move on to the last session now. Mr. Moses. Yes.
Dr. Moses, I wish I had read the same papers that you have read. The ones that I have read have clubbed us exactly with them. Franz Timmermans, Vice Chair of the European Commission, to this great lady, Christiane Amanpour, was on record saying major emitters including China and India. Now, let me tell you something much more than that. The chair of the AOSIS, the Association of Small Island Developing States, the Prime Minister of Barbuda and Antigua, went on record in Sharm el-Sheikh to say, we know who are the major emitters, China, India, and they will pay. Sir, these are realities. How you will manage the negotiations is a different matter. But you need to prepare alliances. One country can get up and say, no, it won't go through. But then you have to be prepared for the consequences of being the one country. In the past, in the United Nations, there are only two countries which say no and get away. One no longer so, and I'm talking about Russia, and the other is the United States. They're talking about climate change. The Kyoto Protocol, which you know is about developed countries cutting their emissions. It was adopted in 1997, and sir, please correct me if I'm wrong, because Al Gore got up, the Vice President of the United States, sitting Vice President, got up and said, my country and I am fully committed. They never ratified. 2015, the Paris Accord was done. In 2016, they withdrew from the Paris Accord. Why am I saying though? No, it's not to blame the United States. It's to make you understand that in the game of nation states and hegemony, it is policy space that matters, and they did not do it because they were not going to do the same things. They did virtually the same thing, but it's like the law of the sea convention. My policy space will not be hindered by what I agree or you agree or whatever else. I am it. And we need to understand this game. And that is the nature of global negotiations. Never get frustrated by them. Never feel disappointed. Just continue to do what you have to do. Remember, we are the largest country in the world. In all probability, we are going to be at least the third largest economy. Some projections, and I'm not talking about PPP terms, how many hamburgers you can buy, etc. No, real terms, market exchange rate terms. The chances are you might even by 2050 edge out the United States as the second largest economy in the world. In this context, think of how the world will think of you. It comes at a price. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's time, we've already taken a lot of additional time to thank the speakers and thank everyone for sharing their thoughts, questions, and hopefully, as Ambassador Puri has said, you will come back with questions to him. Thank you.
Thank you for a great session. We would like the audience to give a round of applause, please. The presentations will now be made to the distinguished participants of this session. Thank you, Dr. Singh, Ambassador Puri, Dr. Yerakasheva, and Lieutenant General Sahani.